All right, here we are once again, the Bald Noggins with our Polka Tim, Polka Prophet. He's still got his substack going. He's on X. He's been writing and thinking, philosophizing, and he's joining us here again today to kind of a continuation of our last show on bombing of Serbia 25 years later. It was a fascinating story. He was actually there for a bit. And if you want to, I'll put the link down below. If you want to see the first show or even go to Substack and read the article, which is an excellent article. And he's written his second kind of continuation of the Serbia bombing with our favorite politician, Madeleine Albright. Is that correct, Tim?
That is right. She is remembered fondly in Serbia as the architect of the bombing in the year 1999, between March and I believe July. 78 days of continuous bombing by NATO and U.S. forces. They dropped, 38,000 bombs or something like that, and then along with cluster bombs, and terrorized the whole population. Plus, on the side, because it's never just one thing. You never just bomb place. You always have multiple flanks operating simultaneously. So the psychological war was just as dynamic as the bombing campaign, okay? And the psychological war is always about making things look spontaneous, authentic, genuine uprising of the people, and it never is. And let me just, I'll say, leave it like that, and relate it to a story where I watched a riot in Germany once. And I was in the Army with my buddy, and on Saturdays, we used to just, go into downtown Frankfurt, and there was a plaza in the center of a huge traffic circle. So you have a traffic circle, and then in the center, you've got this kind of a shopping mall island, and you access it from down below, from across the highway. You go underneath the highway, and you come up on these escalators that exit into this plaza. So part of it was a big open area, and then part of it was dedicated to shopping, very high-end shopping, like a high-end shopping mall. And then on the edges of it, on one edge, they had a number of just like little bistros. So my friend and I used to just sit there and watch the tourists go by, watch the young women and, all that groovy stuff as young soldiers do. Anyway, so we're sitting there and just enjoying our beer, and suddenly we're just like, man, there's all these people started coming up from the escalators, like from underground. It's like, and they were all hippies, all like hardcore bandana wearing, bell bottoms, kind of really exotic looking creatures. And I mean, lots of them. Like, what in the world's going? Next thing we know, they like 400 or 500 of them gathered in this big open area. They were like 20 yards from us. They weren't very far at all. We're just sitting there drinking our beer, and it was just like this big play being executed in front of us. And one guy had a soapbox and a megaphone, and he had this huge crowd, and they had signs, and I believe they were squatters. Squatting back in Germany was a big deal back then. So they would just take over abandoned apartment buildings or whatever and live in them for free. And this is the time of the Baader-Meinhof gang, where hippie revolutionaries were prevalent in the United States. We had the Weathermen and the SDS, Students for Democratic Society. In Germany, it was the Baader-Meinhof gang. In Italy, there was Brigata Rossa. And in Greece, I think it was November 19, they're all coordinated, and they were all supported. Baader-Meinhof was supported by Stasi, the East Germans, were putting money into it to destabilize it. In Italy, the Brigata Rossa were supported by the communists. So anyway, it's a big deal. So there was lots of agitation, and it was supported by different entities. You didn't know if there was, but most of them were supported by different, what I call communist or non-aligned agencies outside of Europe proper, like East Germany or Soviet Union or those sorts of entities, or the Communist Party in Italy. But anyway, so there's this big riot going on, and we're sitting there drinking our beer, and it was just remarkable because there was just so much activity, just like almost like instant pudding, just there it was, there's just like, and they came from underground, and here they are in this big plaza, men, women, big signs, screaming and hollering. And we're just like, wow, this is interesting. And suddenly we notice, because of the traffic circle, we were on the far, if you looked at a circle, we were on the top edge of that circle. And the bottom edge of the circle was buildings. The top edge of the circle was sort of the big open plaza. So imagine half of the big circle was an open plaza with some little benches here and there and maybe a fountain or something, but really not much. Anyway, so these people completely commanded most of the open plaza area. So we're looking, we're just kind of like, wow, this is interesting. Hey, do you see that one? Do you see this one? You just kind of have, like, wow, what, it was just fascinating because they were so busy and angry and screaming and hollering and, fists raised and signs and chanting and all kinds of stuff going on. And then very subtly, one thing about Germans, the Bundes, the German state, what is the Bundespolizei, the Bundeswehr, the Bundes, man, they're serious players. So suddenly there's like these UPS vans. They look just like UPS vans, but they're darker green, this classic German state green. And I look over and I'm like, oh man, what's this? And suddenly there's like 8 or 10 of them, they just boop, boop, boop. And pretty soon all the traffic in the traffic circles stops and there's just vans. There's like 10 or 15 of them. And they're just getting, and then suddenly the drivers get out and they're all in their riot gear. And suddenly they open up the back and there's all these police. Suddenly there's a phalanx of like, I don't know, 80, 100 police with plastic shields standing in front of the rioters. And I'm just like, wow, this is, it's like made for movies stuff, here they are. It's very cinematic and, very, formidable, quiet, incredibly organized. Just everybody was like the same size. There was no irregular, it was just like pure German, beautiful Aryan display of policing. So anyway, here they go. And suddenly the rioters, like these guys appear just as faster than the rioters did. And they're in shock because suddenly the guy with the megaphone looking at the crowd, he turns around, he starts yelling at the police. And then he turns around yelling at the crowd, yelling at the police, and it's all in German. So suddenly he goes, da, 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 he just says something, and suddenly everybody's just looking for something. And he goes, yeah, and he says something. And suddenly there's this volley of rocks and bottles and scraps of trash and whatever, just vegetables, whatever, goes arcing over to the police. And just like the movie Gladiator, boom, the shields come up, boom, 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 boom. All the trash and whatever obstacles or, objects just bounce off these plastic shields. Shields come back down, boom. And then the guy goes, he looks around, he gets a little desperate, and he yells again. So everybody's looking for, ran out of, it's like getting low on ammo, whatever the hell.
It's kind of hard to find trash in Germany back in the 70s.
So, they're running ammo, he gives a command, and everybody's, another volley of less volatile objects go flying over at the police. Boom, 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 boom. Same maneuver. And while this is going on, I didn't notice, but then there's even twice as many police behind them had been mustering in the alleyways where the shops were. And suddenly, boom, they show up in a line, like 150 of them. I don't know how many. There was a lot of them. And suddenly the crowd sees that they're surrounded. They don't know what to do. They're out of junk to throw at people. And pretty soon, like a funnel, the line in the front line kind of separates and forms a V. Okay? And then the trucks start backing up. And pretty soon, there's a number of riot police from the edges start pushing people into their funnel and loading them in vans. And I mean, like, it's like watching agriculture. I mean, like combines or, we're like processing people. Boom, boom. And sure enough, man, that crowd gets smaller and smaller, and the vans keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. And pretty soon, there's no protesters. It's just all police. Suddenly, the police all disappear, and then a whole bunch of these highway department guys with trash cans and brooms show up, sweep it all up, clean it all up, and boom, everything's gone. Is women pushing strollers and tourists taking pictures and shoppers congregating. And this is like 20 minutes. They got rid of 500 people. It was just extraordinary. So anyway, and I'm looking at it, and at that same time, in that same period of time, and this is a little research I did, but the CIA had come out with a new policy. It's called, they were a new overall strategy of getting into soft power, away from the kinetic power. When they were in Laos and Cambodia, the CIA was running active wars. They were pushing actively, fighting the Viet Cong with mercenaries from different countries and organizing kinetic warfare on behalf of the United States from different countries.
I had heard that soft power manual was accidentally left on a Xerox machine, I guess, or some back in the 70s or 80s, and that's how it kind of got out into the public. Well, just somebody found it, a random, what's this? And it kind of started circulating. And
they used that strategy of soft power also was aligned with a book called Democracy, From Dictatorship to Democracy, by a guy named Gene Sharp, who was a political analyst. And basically it's a takeoff on using nonviolent strategies to achieve political aims. So anyway, so back to this big mob. So imagine I had the mindset of a CIA operative, and I would talking to myself, how can I take all this discontent, rage, anger, all this stuff, compress it, organize it, and aim it at my enemy, whoever they are, whoever I want them to be. And basically, it's Riot in a can now. They figured out basically through the soft power elements and NGOs and how to sort of influence. There's no such thing as a popular uprising anymore. It doesn't exist because it takes too much strategy to really do them right. Like this group, they didn't have enough stuff. They didn't have enough money. They were gone in an instant. So what happened is that the state decided how to, for their own means, and we've exported, as the United States, we have exported, we have been able to put discontent in a can and sell it, so to speak. We can go into countries just like this Otpor thing I saw. Now, when I was there, I'm assuming they're like Gandhi. You know what I mean? They're just a bunch of good people, and and they are good people. I'm not, but the other thing is that I want to preface what I'm saying is the people that were there that organized had been bombed by the United States for 78 days. So they're pissed off. And the other thing is that when you looked at a map in 1999 of Europe, Europe ended on the northern border of Italy. And that whole southern peninsula, which included Serbia, Macedonia, all that stuff, was just dark. It was like the old 1820 maps of Africa. There was no railroads, no roads, no nothing. It was just dark. It was just completely cut off. So here you have the economic sanctions, you got political sanctions, you got all kinds of sanctions. The only thing they allowed into Serbia was news media. somehow, they said, oh yeah, let's get our version of the news out, which they did. So when I went back to who's showing up, is I was completely programmed to have Serbia as the scourge of the earth. They were the new bad guys. They're the new Nazis, and I believed it because we had Dan Rather, we had Peter Jennings, we had all these, famous steady Eddie, anchors, Eric Severide, people like that, just very solid, serious men who spoke nothing but the truth, the whole truth. You know what I mean? And we had a State Department that was completely geared, bloodlust like crazy. I mean, you read the old news articles now and you're just going, wow, cluster bombs. Using cluster bombs is, as we said in the last episode, it's just as onerous as you can get. But anyway, these people who organized Otpor were people who had been bombed, had been ostracized, and had been just pushed up against the wall. Okay? If somebody comes along, I mean, when we were in town, women were selling these embroideries, like older ladies selling embroidery. I mean, like huge pieces, like an embroidery that's 6 by 8 feet for a dining room table, intricate, incredible, for like $40. And it was just it was like embarrassing to us to even try and buy. I mean, we were buying it, we purchased. They were happy to sell it to us, but my point is that the devastation was just remarkable. I mean, it was so precise. It was so teeth pulling perfect. If you're talking about, it wasn't indiscriminate. It was as discriminate as you could get. It was like the new era of, psychological terror. We have your name and address on a missile. You see these things famous with the car bombs, cars blowing up in the middle of nowhere, and it's got a bunch of bad guys in it, that kind of thing. That's where a lot of this was really refined in Serbia. And I think a lot of the aerial bombing strategies and the collective ideas of how to execute bigger and bigger wars, which after 1999, there was a bunch of them. We spent a couple of $1 trillion, in armaments over the next 25 years. So this is a 25-year retrospective. And the guy that was there, the Tim that was there, was completely indoctrinated. Serbians were my enemies. I was there on some sort of weird, like, trying to understand things in a new way, not understanding that I was the consummate first world person with the crazy ideas and all this sort of stuff. I didn't know what I was looking at. And even now, looking back at the little riot in Frankfurt, I can see I got it. It's like it's a riot in a can. I'm going to get thousands of people. So anyway, as things went forward, these people in Otpor who had made the agreements and understood the strategies and all this kind of stuff, they were encouraged, as far as I can tell, by elements of the United States, by the empire, I'll call it, by empire forces, which is NATO and the United States and whoever, to basically take the strategies and everything they'd learned and how to do it and why to do it and who to do it with in terms of supporting a foundational. We had the National Endowment for Democracy, we had USAID, and a host of other what I call NGOs that would support this group, and they're called Canvas. Now, Canvas has a very, very sophisticated, it'll be, I'm doing the next part 2 of the story I'm doing is called Riot in a Can. And it's a follow-up on the a Python named Madaleine, on how the new manufacturing of discontent works, and to look at it as a spiritual component. There's an old in Ephesians, it says, we'd wrestle not against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities. And what that meant when you look at the Greek and all that sort of stuff, is that it's an elemental force. Okay, so when you have a bunch of people that are really angry, and let me see here, it's like, it says where you can take the raw, unprocessed emotions of a population, fear, rage, despair, resentment, and you can harvest them, amplify them, and then you can turn them back against the very people who are running that country. You can take the people of that country and turn it against the people in that country for regime change. And a lot of those regime change and the funding is you're doing a favor for another country, a political favor. You become a political tool for another country. So this group Canvas they're global. They were instrumental in the 2014 color revolution in the Ukraine, and I punched in some general research on that. What does it cost? What does a color revolution cost in a country the size of Ukraine? Big country, a lot of people, about $150 million, give or take. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, but in the scale of things, it's really not,
No, in the
looking
scale
at
of things,
overthrowing a
what's at
government.
stake. But, here you got this Riot in Canada. You got a bunch of people who show up with a lot of money. They know how to organize. They understand logistics. You get T-shirts. You get cell phones. You get media. You get, they are just completely wired. Everything is wired and ready to go. So it's basically Riot in a can with all the psychological benefits of fear, rage, and regime change.
And for those who are watching, you can just think back only a year or two here in the United States. We were seeing very similar episodes of that, where nicely stacked piles of bricks placed in certain locations along streets. And I know protesters were going to vans and picking up their T-shirts and their placards. And so we were experiencing that right here in the United States. So it's really cool, especially, what Tim is saying, talking about what 20, 30 years ago, but we're reading in the newspaper going, oh, this is out of hand. This country is falling apart. And here it is right in our own backyard. So that, to me, that's pretty fascinating.
Well, the thing is that there's no such thing as an organized group. It's to fragment consent. They don't want the population to have consent. They want to it's all about fragmenting consent. They don't want 2 or 3 or 4 agreeing on anything. The more disagreement that can be sown, the better. And it's an elemental force. We've crossed the line. My thing is, as somebody that's understanding the world of the spirit in a different way, is that these elemental forces are spiritual things. They're not just a bunch of knuckleheads. They're spiritually amplified, and they're organized. And I'm calling the people that run these things as like shamans, because what they're managing is darkness. They're managing darkness. They're managing fear. They're managing shame. They're managing the guilt that people feel from, you're oppressing me, you're doing this. Just all the misplaced accusations that go on. You know what I mean? It's all about accusation. It's all about fear. And so they're managing it incredibly well. In the United States Canvas, you can go on their site. I'll send it to you, Chris, and you can have it. But you can go on their site, and you can, if you're pissed off and you're, environmentally, religiously, politically, you go through the stack of stuff, socially mad, there's a group you can join. There's a group you can join if you want to protest against Shell Oil, you want to protest against coal, you want to protest against the white people, you want to protest against whatever you want. There's a group formed. There's 73 groups in the United States. There's more groups in the United States than anywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world is like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 3, groups you can join. In the United States, there's 73. Because we're a country of convenience. So to me, it's fascinating looking at these elemental powers such as they are. And the thing is that when they lose their teeth, when they lose their moment, is when they're found out. just like watching this stuff, you know, they're setting stuff on Tesla on fire and stuff. You got to pay people. You know, it's a time like, hey, you know, what are you doing? I'm not doing anything. Hey, you want to make $100? Yeah, you know, put a hoodie on and run down the street. But the people that are organizing it are expert. I call them like the new shamans of darkness. You know, they're orchestrating political darkness. They're orchestrating not just political darkness, but spiritual darkness. They're hiding the truth. They're pretending. They're setting up illusions, dark illusions that cause fear. And, you know, for me, it's kind of like, here, I wrote it down. It's just like, it's the most relevant. It says, let me see here. This is a matrix of legal, social, and economic control. It's the, given what we're discussing, it's like the most relevant interpretation is the invisible controlling systems of thought and power that shape human behavior towards servitude. Do what you're told. Don't have an opinion. You can't comment on what's going on because we'll shame you, we'll dox you, we'll do this to you. So everything that's going on in the country right now is all about fear on one level with the ultimate goal of servitude on the other level. It's not about freedom, it's about servitude. So, you know, basically it's a simple formula. It's just like you stir the emotions of a crowd to a fever pitch. You channel the energy towards a scapegoat or a target. You bind people into a collective frenzy, losing individual sovereignty, and then you sacrifice something or someone to seal the deal. And, you know, and then it's like the true nature of this elemental force is like fear. You know, the empire makes people afraid of their leaders, of collapse, of losing control, hatred. The empire redirects that fear into anger, blaming an enemy, a dictator, a race, an economic class, jealousy. The empire cultivates resentment. You deserve more. You are oppressed. Rage. The empire harnesses this fury, pushing for violence and chaos in the name of liberation. And then false hope. The empire promises a new order, but only under its guidance. And finally, submission. The movement achieves nothing real, but leaves people exhausted, confused, and under a new system of control. And when I say empire, I really mean the empire that's been running this thing forever and ever. I would say if there was an umbrella that runs over, it's this: he that weakens nations. I believe in evil, just like I believe in God. And I believe that the element that weakens nations, I call him Leviathan because that's what he's called in scriptures, is Leviathan. And Leviathan is supported by the sons of pride. He rules over the sons of pride. And the sons of pride are trying to put the human populace in subjection, into servitude. And that's what you see over and over again. And so, anyway, and it was just fascinating to kind of spin that around and say, well, how does this relate to scripture? Well, it was a mob that wanted Jesus dead. It was a mob. It wasn't, you know, yes, there was power, but even the government said, hey, we're not doing nothing. It was the mob that pushed it. And the mob is still pushing it. It is the primal elemental force on this earth now, is the mob.
And kind of the mob concept, even in Jesus' day, his crucifixion, the Pharisees organized the mob to get Jesus crucified. So, you know, it wasn't just this spontaneous mob that appeared. They were paid and it was organized, you know.
So that's kind of what that's where my head's at these days, is just looking at things through a lens that's more designed to say, okay, now what do I do about this? It's basically you say, hey, it is what it is. And it was powerful enough. And this is how powerful. How powerful is it? Powerful enough for Peter say, I never saw that guy. I don't know who he is. And that's exactly what's going on now. It's that kind of reaction that is dynamically spiritual. And to say that it isn't is crazy. I mean, not crazy, but, you know, you've got to look at it twice say, wow, that it really is. So suddenly the world becomes framed in light and dark in new ways. And so what do we do about it? Well, basically we have to transcend it. We've got to love our enemies. You know what I mean? We've got to understand that we're sovereign individuals loved by God. Here we are. And it's our sovereignty, our individual understanding of who God is that's powerful, that has power. Because
I was gonna say, it comes to understanding and knowing the truth.
yes.
If you know the truth, just like you're talking about riot in the can, but if you know the truth about these riots and what they're, you kind of see the underlying momentum that's pushing these events. It's not necessarily a group of people who are angry; they're getting paid, or just this kind of. And
Sure.
once they're found out, then they, find themselves in shame. We don't have, So a very interesting. So I encourage everyone watching, listening to go ahead and go to Tim's Substack, Polka Prophet, Polka Tim, and get all caught up on all this information. And you got new stuff coming out, right? You said you got another one coming out next week or next few days.
This one here, right in the can. I'm talking about it, but I'm getting I'm putting it all together. Should be on Substack in the next couple of days.
Okay, that'd be a good one. Yeah, it's very relevant to the times we live in. So we're done.
I'll call you back.
Show in the can. All right. Thanks a lot. Bald Noggins signing off.